Yeah. All right. Well, Jimmy, with that, let's dive over to our chapter. Very short chapter
Mhm.
today. John 4 here. So John is watching as Jarl's men are competing with the Magnarch to see who will reach the top of the wall first. Many of the climbers fall to their death, including Jarl, but several eventually reach the top. As long rope ladders are dropped down to the base to allow the others to climb, John notices Ygritte with tears in her eyes. She tells him that they never found the horn of Jormon, which would have helped them bring the wall down without a fight.
Yes.
So yeah, it's a very, very short chapter today. So glad we were able to get some news in here, but I'll just start here and read a little bit of the first passage here. So Ghost was gone when the wildlings led their horses from the cave. Did he understand about Castle Black? John took a breath of the crisp morning air and allowed himself to hope. The eastern sky was pink near the horizon and pale gray higher up. The sword of the morning still hung in the south, the bright white star in its hilt blazing like a diamond in the dawn, but the blacks and grays of the darkling forest were turning once again to greens and golds, reds and russets. And above the soldier pines and oaks and ash and sentinels stood the wall, the ice pale and glimmering beneath the dust and dirt of the pocket of that pocketed its surface. So very, very heavily House Dane imagery there. Not only are they looking at the constellation of the Sword of the Morning, but the House Dane's colors, which are also pink and gray. And then, of course, it's bright white star and this hilt blazing like a diamond in the dawn. Right. So it's like, it's like a shining star in the dawn, very heavily implying House Dane imagery there.
Yeah, certainly a call to that, and it raises our ears for the suspicion that maybe John is a Sword of the Morning, and also Corn Halfhand is echoed in this chapter because remember this is the mission that he has sent him on, and a lot of people like the idea that he's Arthur Dane. There's a lot of echoes in this chapter for how short it is. There's also a lot more questions posed, I think, in this chapter than there are answers to anything, and that's due to the fact that John in this chapter, as our protagonist, is viewing. He is kind of passively observing and making comments on the wall, on the wildlings, the history of how they got there, why they're there, and then also the Night's Watch's defenses, which kind of gives us a clue about how the Night's Watch are dealing with the fact that, one, they don't have as many people as they used to, but also they have crumbling infrastructure. And they're trying to use that to their advantage to kind of funnel people in and out, of these areas so that they can basically, put them in a barrel and shoot them. So it is a short chapter, but I think it's kind of cool. And also anything about the Horn of Winter is always going to pique my interest.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And back to the House Dane thing real quick. If that was the only thing we had heard about it in this John is north of the wall
Mhm.
business, then it would just be, oh, that's just a fun little tie-in way to him
Yeah.
to do it. But the thing that raises all the question is it's mentioned in just about every chapter in which John, like post John Corn Halfhand, him with Ygritte and everything, like it's every single second of it. Is there as well. And it could just be simply if John, of course, isn't actually a Dane, which and he potentially could be, right? He could be Ned and Ashara, which is the second most popular theory behind
Yeah.
Lyanna and Rhaegar, of course. It could just be George trying to actually play with people and mess them up to think that that's a thing. Or it could also be that a lot of this imagery is happening. The John being tied to the Sword of Morning imagery is happening in which John is forsaking his vows with Ygritte,
Yeah. Definitely.
which is, if you want to view that with a tie to the Dane, would potentially still be Ned and Ashara, who Ned did love Ashara.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that I like that a little bit more. I've always thought that George was kind of messing us with Ned and Ashara, and I used to say I need to know what happened there. But you know what? The story is about Jon Snow in a lot of ways, and I think it's more to add to the mystery of his parentage. I think one of the things that's interesting is like George poses the question to Dan and Dave when they're doing the show, like who's Jon Snow's real parents, and they answered. But so many people, I think, legitimately read these books and they just accept that Ned is his dad. Like they don't even question it. They're like, wait, what do you mean his parents might not be
Oh, I
Ned?
know.
and one, I think that might unfortunately make a commentary on how people read nowadays. But two, it's clear that George wanted this to be a question in the reader's head as they went through. It actually wasn't supposed to be this big like whoa moment as far as like we didn't know that there was something up. I think he wanted you to be guessing this entire time and maybe even nudging us towards a Shara Dane at this point.
Could be. Yeah, I mean, for me, it was just Jon Snow was my favorite character. There's all the things going on, and I was just like, what's the deal with this mom? Because
Mhm.
like, I mean, very early on, it's the hey, like, we'll talk about it, like thing, right? And it's okay. Then that is the thing that sets the
Yeah.
stage for this is like then because then Ned dies, right? When Ned dies, the secret of John, and it's like now we're never gonna learn that. So I mean, that is the the key to like obviously the whole story.
Yeah, it sure is.
Yeah.
And also it's it's like this sad tale, right? Of two people who loved one another and just like the layers to this thing. So not only is it a secret, but also the narrative is that Rhaegar, obviously abused Lyanna and she got kidnapped. You know what I'm saying? And it actually is none of this. From what
Right.
we think, right? We think that they were actually interested in one another, maybe possibly in love, and Robert was actually the bad guy.
Right.
Robert killed Prince Charming. That's and it's
Yeah.
just like when you think about all that, you're like, God, it really does revolve around John. So that's kind of why I think we may never get any Ashara Dane and Ned Stark confirmation or answers, because truly what it's about, I think, is to make us ponder Jon Snow's parentage. And then we can assume that there was something between Ned and Ashara Dane, and whether or not they ever had a kid or something. Maybe we'll find out. Maybe we won't. I don't know. I would be okay
Right.
with it going unanswered, but I don't know. Ashara Dane died and we never got a body. So that's always a
Right.
big eyebrow raiser in fantasy books.
That's something you and I have never really talked about.
I don't
Is
think so. I mean, I
I don't
know
think
I've
I don't think
mentioned how much I
I don't
love
think
that,
right. I
but
don't think you and I have ever really talked about like is Septa Lemore a Shardane?
yeah, we might have to do the deep dive. Part of it's because a lot of those sections in Dance with Dragons are not as fresh in my mind as something like a Storm of Swords is. So I've
Right.
been kind of waiting. I mean, obviously it's going to take us a while to get there, but like I've been kind of waiting to reread those and really close reading the sentences to see if we can pick out anything that hint. I mean, I think it's pretty clear from what I remember of I don't know, probably 4 or 5 times I've read the book, that Lamora had a child. Like there's no doubt
Right.
that she had a child,
Yeah.
and everyone on this boat is someone they're not. And
Right.
and Lamora just isn't just some random person, right? It probably has
Yeah. I
some
mean, yeah, and that's something I've never really explored too. Is the idea like, well, just because I do not fall into the Ned plus Ashara camp at all. I mean, the Ned plus Ashara could have happened, but I don't think Ned plus Ashara equals John.
John.
So
Yeah, I don't agree.
right. Um, but I guess in theory, if you want to go down like some double, triple theory levels here, some serious icebergs in which all these things have to connect in order for other theories to be feasible. I mean, if you want to go down that route, then I suppose Septa Lemora could at some point meet John and and he could meet his mother.
Right. You're saying if R plus L equals J were not true, it opens up the idea that Lamora could be his actual mom
Could
and that they
be.
end up
Yeah.
meeting. And then she's sitting there looking at a young Griff that's supposed to be Aegon and actually looking at a Targaryen descent. Yeah. I mean, that is interesting. Like, I will say this, like, I'm
Right.
not on board with the theory, but I'll be damned if that's not compelling as hell. And
Right.
a
It'd
totally
be
new angle I've never really thought about, to be honest.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things is sometimes when you begin to dive into all of these Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire theories is yeah, it's like those things where it's like a football or it's like a football and a basketball are both a ball, but only one of them can be a football. You know what I mean? It's like
Mhm.
if X plus Y equals is true, then whatever you want to go down those things. Um, because like Benjen, like he mentions Benjen here too, but Benjen is somebody who we've said we don't think his cold hands in the books is
No.
going to be very different than the show. So I think Benjen still has some role to play. Benjen could be the one to tell John of his parentage, whether it's Ned plus Ashara or R plus L equals J. I do think Benjen is going to come back at some point too, and whether it's John that meets him or Bran that meets him. Um, I do think he is going to have a role to play, but I'll dive back into here to the chapter because he does mention Benjen, and again, this is a really short chapter, but we do get a little bit of like history on the wall and stuff as well.
Yeah, and I
So
got a question for you at
go
the
ahead.
end.
Oh,
I'll
okay,
wait
okay.
till the end.
So the wall was often said to stand 700 feet, but Jarl had found a place where it was both higher and lower. Before them, the ice rose sheer from out of the trees like some immense cliff, crowned by wind-carved battlements that loomed at least 800 feet high, perhaps 900 in spots. But that was deceptive. John realized as they drew closer, Brandon the Builder had laid his huge foundation blocks along the heights wherever feasible, and hereabouts the hill rose wild and rugged. He had once heard his uncle Benjamin say that the wall was a sword east of Castle Black, but a snake to the west. It was true. Sweeping in over one huge humped hill, the ice dipped down into a valley, climbed the knife edge of a long granite ridgeline for a league or more, ran along a jagged crest, dipped again into a valley deeper still, and then rose higher and higher, leaping from hill to hill as far as the eye could see into the mountains out west.
Yeah, some pretty excellent imagery here, and just like the wall in itself having so much like mystique, but also epicness, and it's like this big magical barrier that like we kind of just take for granted, like when we talk about the series, and like, yeah, it's a low fantasy series that revolves around like
I know.
politics. Oh, but there is this massive magical boundary in the north that's keeping zombies out. Like, you know what I mean? It's like
And dragons
and
out.
dragons. That's right. Yeah. So
Dragons don't want to go over the wall.
yeah, we have long overlooked the wall and its creation.
I know.
Me and you have talked about
Yeah.
when it was built. Like we did go into that when we talked in the World of Ice and
We
Fire.
did a
We
little
when
World
the
of
hell
Ice and
was
Fire
this thing
recap.
built and how?
It's
And
not clear. And that's the craziest thing about it, because you would think that the wall was built after you'd have like, but then that doesn't make sense either. It's like it seems like you would want to make the wall to keep the White Walkers out. But if you make it after you've beaten them, then what's the point? But if you make it before you've beaten them, then how do they get to a point where you have to go beat them?
there's certainly a possibility that they built the wall after the battle, knowing that it was going to reoccur. That they knew this was going to be a cycle, and that they had to come back. That is totally possible, and I would accept that. But it just feels like there's a big piece of information missing from that history, does it not?
It does. Let me, I'm grabbing I got my book here in front of me
Uh-oh, you
because
pulled out the good book,
the big book, right?
the big one.
The world of it is honestly, it's like my favorite thing because it talks about the giants, right? And literally the Dawn Age is like the most intriguing thing in this entire book, World of Ice and Fire, and it's the whole thing is so vague. Like it doesn't make sense given what we know, because it's the Long Night starts after the Age of Heroes, after Garth Greenhand and
Mhm.
all these people who probably were just regular people but have been in, I mean, maybe they were more magical. We don't know, but maybe they've been fantasized. It's kind of like how King Arthur, they think
Yeah.
was something like never even existed, but it was just sort of like a combination of, he
Mhm.
definitely existed. I know he's out. I know Excalibur's out there. You'll never ever persuade me that King Arthur did not exist. But that's at least what they, what they say, and everything. But yeah, I mean, it's the whole thing is crazy just because the timing, it just doesn't, like, so much of the timing just doesn't add up
Well, the
for
timeline isn't super rigid. Like the folks,
right.
in the in-world narrators that are writing down this World of Ice and Fire, they're not super concerned with that. They're more so concerned with the way that Westeros ended up being shaped and the events that got us to the present day, right? Like that's kind of what it is. And fair enough. I mean, a lot of history's timelines can be very confusing, and we're always learning more stuff about it. What we are reading is a time and place in Westeros, written by somebody who has the information to do at the time. So,
Yeah. So okay. So here, real quick, just in the World of Ice and Fire, in the Dawn Age, it says there's a passage here. So this is before the Long Night takes place, right? It's talking about the giants, and it's saying this is a maester again who's telling this. He says it's long been held that they did this for protection from predators such as dire wolves or shadow cats with their simple stone weapons, and even their vaunted green seers were not proof against. But other sources dispute this, stating that their greatest foes were the giants. This is talking about the children, like children, like were children of the forest were fighting against the giants, and that they held out inside like bogs, by the way, which means something in marshlands, right?
Mhm.
Chronic bin magic might actually be children magic. That might be closer essentially than we think, which would also explain why Howland Reed was actually able to get to the Isle of Faces if he has that sort of blood.
That's a great question.
Maybe he has children's blood in him.
And he was
So
small. And he was small. He was
and
small in stature.
he's small in stature. But as you continue, just real here, it says but other sources dispute this, stating their greatest foes were the giants, as hinted in the tales told of the north, and as possibly proved by Maester Kennett in the study of Barrow near the Long Lake. A giant's burial with obsidian arrowheads found amidst its ribs. It brings to mind the transcription of a wildling song in Maester Herrick's History of Kings Beyond the Wall. So that would imply that if there was something similar that happened, it would have there's kings beyond the wall, which means the wall would already have to be built.
Yeah, and then that's where we get confused.
I
That's
know they jump around a lot, unfortunately, in World of Ice and Fire, and so it's hard to tell exactly like when and where things are happening.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's somebody out there who's probably trying to pin down the timeline, and we're just not aware. So maybe I should do a little bit more research into that. But also just the forming of the wall, right? And who did it? And Ygritte says it's blood in this chapter. She said it's blood magic, and I'm inclined to kind of believe her because of the magical properties. And we do know blood magic seems to be something that is legitimate, right? Like,
right.
Who is granting that power? We're not sure. We don't know if it's R'hllor or some other god, and they just gave it a name, but blood does seem to matter in the Fantastic Realms in the series. So.
Yeah, King's blood has seemed to matter. Blood magic has seemed to do things, and that's another thing too. We've talked about too is like King's blood and blood magic might be the same thing, but it's just the people think that there's like a king involved, and suddenly there's more power to it, right? Like because Stannis should be the rightful king, right? Should be
true king.
You would imagine then Stannis King's blood would have actual power, since he is the one true king of Westeros, regardless of everything else that's going. But then, obviously in the show, she gets blood from Gendry. What's like, well, Gendry's Robert, so there's, so it just seems like you can just pick and choose for King's blood.
Yeah, and who's to say that all the King's blood prior, maybe like it was just Targaryen blood, like maybe Targaryen.
Right. And if you just declare yourself king, are you just suddenly?
Yeah, who's keeping track? Who's auditing
exactly
things is what I need to know.
Mira Mazdur takes Dany's blood.
Or is it a lie that it has to be King's blood? Maybe it's just blood in general.
Right.
And we're seeing it through like
Dany could have King's blood.
Yeah, we're seeing it through that classism lens, that it's only these nobles' blood that matters.
Right.
That would kind of
this Balon Greyjoy calls himself a king. Is his blood suddenly King's blood?
Well, it's splattered on the rocks from the drawbridge, so
we'll
never know. It got washed out.
Yeah. So okay. Did you already ask me your question? We just kind of went on a big thing.
Well, I mean, this kind of goes into the end of the chapter, but honestly, I do think it's a good time, and I can even read this part. Okay, so we get all the stuff about the wall, right? Ygritte watched them struggle for a while. I hate this wall, she said in a low, angry voice. Can you feel how cold it is? It's made of ice, Jon pointed out. Nor had it, you know nothing, Jon Snow. This wall is made of blood. And this is one of my favorite paragraphs in this chapter. Nor had it drunk its fill. By sunset, 2 of the Thenns had fallen from the ladder to their deaths, but they were the last. It was near midnight before Jon reached the top. The stars were out again, and Ygritte was trembling from the climb. I almost fell, she said, with tears in her eyes. Twice, thrice, the wall was trying to shake me off. I could feel it. And I just love that, like, nor had it drank its fill, and talking about blood. Like, it's just it's creepy almost. And then to feel like you're climbing this insurmountable wall, like it's already a really big task. And in Ygritte's head, she believes this wall was like alive and trying to shake her off. And it's just like, that would be terrifying, right? I think she's trembling from exhaustion, but also, Jon says it's from the climb, but I think she's scared. I don't think it's just exhaustion. But here's the thing. She continues to cry, and Jon wants to know why she's crying. And she says this: I'm crying because we never found the Horn of Winter. We opened up 100 graves and let all those shades loose in the world and never found the horn of Yoramon to bring this cold thing down. The obvious question is, well, where's the horn of winter? But I got a bigger question for you, Matt. When they were going through these graves that they found, first, whose graves? We're not sure. But they let shades out into the world. Is it possible that in this hunt for the horn of winter, that they are the ones who awoke the White Walkers?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, we know that there's some White Walkers that are already out.
Mm-hmm.
Could they have awoken somebody more powerful, like a Night King or something like that? I would say so, because and the idea of like shades and ghosts, like ghosts are
Mm-hmm.
mentioned in this world, but we don't really ever see them like we do in like obviously other media where, right? Like like when we think of ghosts, it's like, hey, did you see your lights flickering or something kind of weird? That could be a ghost, right?
Yeah.
But we don't, but ghosts themselves aren't really a thing in this universe. The only thing we get close to is like the shadow baby that
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Melisandre lets out. I would say that's really the closest thing to a ghost. Obviously, they think there are ghosts, like there's the song by Jenny Song, High in the Hall of the Kings, the
Also, the Ghost
ghosts,
of Harrenhal, right?
the ghost of Harrenhal, John's dog,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. Yeah.
Um, so ghosts, they still think there are ghosts and spirits and demons and all whatever. Yeah, I'm sure all of those types of things. So I mean, is it possible that they let something out that's going to some evil out or something? Absolutely. Keep in mind they are also opening as many graves as they can say. What's to say that some of those graves didn't contain people who were powerful in magic, and curses and some of those things might exist. I mean, it seems like Dany might be cursed by Amir Mazda. So it's just
Ah,
another level of mysticism that we haven't really explored. Like, it's so funny in this universe because anytime I bring up some of like the crazy theories, like, oh, is Roose Bolton a vampire? Right? Is this
mhm.
is this thing? It's like one of those things where you just sort of laugh it off. And this is what George has done extremely well. Is George has shown you magic in places where it makes sense, which when you dive into the books and you're trying to dive through the theories, makes other places almost seem laughable because it makes it seem real. Like he's done this incredible balance of like realism with actually showing you legitimate magic in another thing to where you kind of like separate the two. You're like, yeah,
Yes.
no way. But the real quick, the Boltons, like just on that theory, because I think it's one that I think is kind of funny in a way. Is like people look at the idea of like him being a vampire, and they're like, that's what a joke. Like, no, that's obviously not a thing. Their House Sigil is literally cutting people's skins off, and there's quite literally a group that Arya Stark is involved with, which whole deal is they wear the faces of people and like can magically disguise themselves.
And George R. R. Martin wrote a vampire horror novel, and where he
Right.
describes the vampires in that book very similar to how he uses some similar adjectives and words that he used to describe Joshua the vampire to Roose Bolton in A Song of Ice and Fire. And A Song of Ice and Fire was written after. Just
Right.
saying. I'm just saying that there could be, but you're right. He does an amazing job of making us feel connected to this world that like it's something that could have happened in our world. Like it's an alternate history almost. And when we think about history, like a lot of people have fun thinking about the mysticism of the past, right? And you have ancient aliens and all this crazy stuff, right? But the reason why it's so intriguing to us is because it feels like a real place and time that we're not so sure about. And he has done such an amazing job of taking like myth and fable and mysticism and then making it feel like it's attached to this low fantasy world. Like we would think King's Landing would have zero magic, but in Essos, who knows, right? Like there's this huge divide, and we seem to just kind of accept it. It's something else. But curses, Mary, Matt, you're right. Dany is cursed. I would say I feel like she is definitely cursed. Honestly,
Well, she gives her a curse and she gives her exactly what she has to do in order to break it. To be
yeah.
like, I mean, she says, when the sun sets in the east, and all those things, which is basically the opposite of the way the world works, essentially. I mean, that's what basically what Mira Mazdur says. Like, only then can you bear a child, and so that is, in a way, it's a curse. And so
Yeah.
it is interesting to think about the idea of, yes, they were digging up all of these graves, and we hear all the time about, well, kinslaying is bad, and then we see bad things happen, right?
Yeah.
Theon Greyjoy might actually be part of that,
Mm-hmm.
because if Theon says he slept with that innkeeper woman, and we know you know that he ends up killing those stable boys, and you kind of look at it,
Like
the
maybe.
ages line up, might be his kid, and then that's why he goes through everything he goes through, because everyone always says kinslaying is like the single worst thing you can do.
Yes. And one of the
I
reasons
mean,
why
across cultures, across religions, like everyone in this world, like the wildlings talk about it, like north, south, it
free
doesn't
folk.
matter. Free folk, exactly. Exactly. But they all say kinslaying is bad.
Well, it's one thing that is consistent across all cultures is that you do have kin. And it
Right.
would appear that in a survival mindset that the kin are the people that you're going to rely on the most. So, of course, murdering them is one of the worst things that you could possibly do. It's a betrayal that transcends cultures, languages, locations. It is something about the individual and the person. And that's why in our world also, kinslaying is pretty much unanimously considered pretty horrible, with very few exceptions. So I want to say this, though. The thing that I love about A Song of Ice and Fire is that you can also always look at it from a more skeptical lens, because we see magical things that are proposed to us as magical that are not, right? Or a switching of expectations. Like when Sansa has that prophetic vision of a giant stomping through Winterfell, and it ends up being Sweet Robin stomping on her snow castle in A Dance with Dragons. And you're like, okay, that actually fulfills the prophecy. That's very interesting. So, for instance, Danny's curse. Who's to say that the inbred family tree has not just led her to end up, being unable to have children? Or maybe she can
Right.
have children. Maybe it's Drogo's fault. Maybe it's Drogo's fault.
Right.
So maybe she's not cursed. See, it's fun that I can play both sides of this. And I'm gonna bring this back to us, you and I, in our conversation. So we've talked about how the White Walkers or most like I shouldn't say most likely. We believe that the White Walkers have their own culture, they're their own species, and that they have been existing up in the north, and they are an extension of human beings rather than just mindless zombies. Okay. What if these graves belong to those people, and it is such a transgression in their culture to do something like this that the White Walkers are like, nope, we're taking them out. And that's what if it
I
was
see what you're
that?
saying. Yeah.
What
That
if
could
it
be
was
the thing.
that?
Because clearly they're existing, and they're doing something. I mean, obviously they're taking offerings from Craster, right? Like, that is still, to me, of all of the things we see,
So weird.
that is the craziest thing in both the show and the books, is that the White Walkers are taking offerings from Craster in the form of these children. Whether he was just, I mean, clearly something had to happen for him to do it. Maybe it was just originally he didn't want any male kids, because he's just a weirdo and he wants to have all of his
Yeah.
daughter or wives, whatever. I mean, obviously that's weird. And so he just was like, he just took the babies and he took them out there, right? Because just to die, which, I mean, is a terrible thing to do. But I mean, like, you could see, like, you could just see it as that. It's like, nope, just take it out there and get rid of it. Like, I don't want to.
Mhm.
So, and then maybe the White Walker started taking it, and he realized, oh, I haven't, like, been accosted by, wildlings, or
Like
haven't
he
seen
stumbled
White
on
Walkers.
is what you're saying. Like
He stumbles into seeing, oh, this is keeping them at bay. And then they start to hear rumors and stuff like that. And in his little camp, maybe somebody sees one at some point, and so they realize, they say, oh, they're taking them at night. Like, that's what's happening. And then that's the way it did it. Otherwise, there's something where, is there a deal made? I mean, it's crazy
they
to
can
think
be
about, but
bartered with. That's huge.
right. I mean, yeah, because somehow, whether it's just he stumbles into it, or I don't think he has a conversation with them, but you know what I mean? Like, something happens to where he decides to do that, and then the White Walkers decide to take it and not just go kill them all or take them all, or you know what I mean. So clearly, the White Walkers on at least view Craster as, we're going to let him keep doing this, whether they view it as a sacrifice or a tribute or whatever.
Yeah. And clearly there's an expectation there, and that they have come, whether or not Craster's aware, he is now in an agreement with these things. So,
Right.
I mean, who's to say that they don't have all these, like, cultures and rules and ceremonies or whatever? And who knows, maybe the wild, or I'm sorry, the free folk, my bad,
There we go.
crack open a grave and they look at this and they're like, this was our former, you know what I'm saying? Like, it could be that
Right.
big.
It's sacred. It's sacred ground to them.
Yes. And that's totally feasible. That is totally feasible to us. So I think that this is so interesting. And at the very least, we can think, okay, we are looking for a catalyst for why magic entered the world. Why did the White Walkers start marching? Why are dragons existing? Why does R'hllor seem like he's legitimate? The House of Black and White's doing all this thing. Magic is re-entering the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. Could it be that when they cracked these graves, this was the reason?
Well, a big theory in the show. Remember, I mean, you go back to before season 8, everyone was speculating that, and I agree with you. It could be that they crack the graves, and that could be the thing, because clearly the White Walkers decide, like, now's the time.
Yes.
And this seems like the worst time to do it because dragons are coming back, which seemed to be the thing that could, like, eliminate them. But
Yeah.
But yeah, so clearly the White Walkers do it. But for a long time, remember, everybody thought going into season 8, and we still don't know in the books. And again, White Walkers, Night King doesn't exist in the books, right? Very different. But for the longest time, everybody thought it was the baby. It was Sam's baby, Sam and Gilly's. Well, I mean, really, it's Gilly's baby, but they named that. Everybody thought that was the thing. Remember, everybody thought them not giving that baby to the White Walker that it was probably expecting was like the thing that everyone was like, oh no, that's the trigger.
So literally they're just like, well, we must go get baby, therefore we march south. Like,
yeah, remember, everybody thought there was some sort of connection to it. Now in the books, there is a big difference between those babies, because those babies have been switched.
It's so much more interesting in the book. It's so cool.
Yeah.
It's so
big difference, because Sam and Gilly's baby is what's that, Castle Black with
it's Mance Raider's kid, in quotes. Yeah, like
right, but Mance Raider's actual kid is with Gilly and Sam,
the heir to the king beyond the wall. I mean, dude, oh god, I want the next book so bad.
I know, but there is, and that's the thing, there's so many moving pieces, and there's so many ways you could go with it, which is probably why it's taken George R.R. Martin as long as it has to finish it.
Yeah.
And I will say that he has not posted. This is one of the longest stretches he's gone without posting on Not a Blog.
I'll tell you this, unfortunately,
not saying
his last update was depressing as hell, so I'm not optimistic right now. He kind of said nothing I've ever done in my life has mattered, which, hey, George, you just like me for real. I feel that every day.
Hey man, he hasn't posted since February 6th. Normally he posts about every week.
I just want to say something about George R. R. Martin real quick. And I was thinking about this today because, I read a lot, and actually George R. R. Martin's the reason why I started reading so much again. And I am in debt to him beyond belief for writing these books, not just because of this awesome podcast, but because it sent me down a path where I'm so passionate about reading and literacy and connecting with people online. And it turned out to be a YouTube channel now that I have millions of views on for people just want to talk about fantasy book. I mean, how cool is that? But the thing I like about George R. R. Martin, because I see a lot of people in the space, like a lot of authors, and the one thing I can say about George R. R. Martin, it never felt like he ever bought into his own hype. Yeah. If you read his blog, he's constantly dogging himself. He is constantly upset with himself. And I can relate to that so very much. I'm like, man, you know what? I also don't believe in myself. Like, it doesn't feel like he's very arrogant, which is one of the reasons why I think his characters come off relatable as well, because anyone that's super duper arrogant is vice versa, minus Jamie, generally unlikable, right? Our characters have doubts about themselves. They wonder their place in the world. John's a fantastic example of this. I love George. I wanted to put that out there. George, I know you're
Oh,
listening.
oh yeah,
Big fan of
oh
the
yeah,
show,
yeah. I hope he
obviously.
does.
Yeah.
I hope he does because we're never like I never get tired of these books. It's just I have like ADHD, whatever. I get tired of things all the time, but I never ever get tired of
Well, you're big into
anyone
the
that.
superhero thing, right? And you know the big superhero things. What if? What if this? What if that? I've never liked that for anything, even stuff I've been really into. This is the only thing where I
Yeah,
find alternate branches of what could have happened interesting.
I know. Well, or and then like potential ties to things. Like literally, as you're reading this, I'm like looking at the chapter here, and you literally read this to me, and you were saying, hey, like this is awesome. This is what you took out of it, right? Was you were saying this line right here. Um, Can you feel how cold it is? It's made of ice, John pointed out. You know nothing, Jon Snow. This wall is made of blood. Now had it drunk, it's filled. And actually, I was kind of thinking of two different things here. One, maybe the wall's magical properties does come from, as we were talking about blood magic, like people who try to climb it and die, and like it sort of absorbs it or whatever.
Oh,
Other people think that there is quite literally an ice dragon in the wall, and that's what's giving it its
oh,
magical powers as well. But I like both. But I do like this line here. It's made of ice, John pointed out. You know nothing, Jon Snow. This wall is made of blood. Well, I mean, just the idea of like Starks and winter and John saying, "Oh, it's ice." And Ygritte saying, "You know nothing. This wall is made of blood." Which, if you want to talk about John's character, does potentially, that is a fun little way to do a line there. John saying, "Oh, it's ice," and Ygritte saying it's blood, because what is the Targaryen phrase? Fire and
and blood.
blood.
I like
Yeah.
it because
That's
he thinks he's pure. He thinks he's made of ice, which he's half
right.
right. He's
Right.
half right.
Right.
He is
But fire and blood is would
right.
technically be his house
Yes, and
name.
also just it's interesting that John is so sure of his parentage and of him being a bastard. He's also so sure of what the wall is made, and I know she says it a lot, but it really does show that Jon Snow really does not know anything
He
about
does
the
not.
wall. He only knows
Yeah.
what's been told to him.
Yeah.
Hmm.
We talked about this last time about like alternate universes and things. And like last time we did a John chapter, it was like 2 or 3 ago. But there are a lot of good things that the show did in terms of like, when you think about characters and stuff like that, like, the fact that Kit Harington, and I always forget her name, but the woman who plays Ygritte in the show, that they're literally married in real life.
Yeah, and also like royalty, like they both come from like royal heritage,
Oh,
which is
really?
really yeah. He's like a
But
prince.
so it does kind of make the somberness of their thing a
Oh,
little.
yeah.
What is her name? It's like Rose. I always forget her name.
Rose McGowan or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. And
Their
then like,
chemistry on screen is fantastic,
oh,
by the way.
it's so good.
It's
And the fact
awesome.
that they're still married. So many celebrity couples,
That's
and
right.
especially like they did a big thing together, and then of course
Yeah.
like so that's great. And then you look at like Sansa. Like Sansa loses Nymeria right out of the, or not Nymeria, Lady, right out of the gate, essentially. But Sophie Turner actually kept that dog.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, no, she kept, yeah, that's her dog, man.
Oh, God,
Isn't it great?
that's so good, man. I know
Yeah,
this. I know that we're just gushing, like, man. You know what, man? This is a great show. No,
it's great.
yeah, we're just happy to be here talking about this. But for the show having the ending it did, I get pretty much just warm feelings thinking about it. And I'm also just super thankful for the casting. Like so many people did such an amazing job, like career performances. And I'm always happy when I see them having it like doing well, right? Like I know
Mhm.
Kit Harington went to rehab and he had some issues, but it really seemed like, he was able to stick out his marriage, which is amazing, and she supported him and he made it through. And I don't know. I feel like almost a not a parasocial type of relationship, but I feel an appreciation for the people who made the show as great as they did.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah,
I know.
man.
All right, guys. Well, with that, I think that's probably a good place to end this chapter. Very short chapter, like we said.
But good stuff there.
Yeah, very good stuff here. So let me think about this. So we are doing one more chapter, and then we're diving in to the
Probably, yeah. So I'm going to be gone in
or the
2 weeks,
timeline
right? I'm going to be gone
in
in
two
2 weeks.
weeks. Yeah, I keep thinking you're gone next week, but you're not. It's the
Next
week
week we can
after.
do another chapter. and news.
Okay.
And then I like how we're planning this like literally on the podcast, but just so people know what's coming. 2 weeks I will be gone. So whether or not you want to do an episode, it's up to you.
Yeah, I'm gonna do I'm gonna do a big like Ravens episode because we have a ton of comments on TikTok and stuff like that. A bunch of theories people have asked. So I think it would be kind of easy to just hammer out.
Great idea. So then when I return, probably the last week of March, then we will
Right.
in the House of the Dragon rewatch.
Exactly. And then of course in April, my schedule is completely up in the air because I'm supposed to have a kid, so I guess that might throw a wrench in my plans.
The successor of the podcast is
exactly. Yep. So that might throw a wrench in my plans as well. So, all right. Well, guys, with that, then we would like to thank you for playing the Game of Thrones. In our next episode, we will be discussing A Storm of Swords, Jaime 4.
And if you like our podcast, don't forget to subscribe, like us, write a review, leave a comment, or send us a raven at btkcast@gmail.com or bendthekneepodcast.com.
All right. We will see you next time. And remember that winter is coming.